Donal, thanks for joining us on the bus today. One of your buses, in fact.
Absolutely.
And very impressive that it is. Now, Dublin Bus was the most widely used public transport service in 2019. What were the main reasons for that?
I suppose the first thing I'd say is that we have nearly 1,000 buses in our fleet, and we're providing over 100 bus routes covering the whole of the Greater Dublin area. So we have a very comprehensive network of services. We treat reliability as very important, and I think people have come to trust us to provide a good, reliable service. And I suppose a booming economy has helped, population growth, but I think you all the time have to be able to deliver the service. If you don't deliver the service, then your numbers will suffer. So we're very pleased to be in the position that we're in.
You mentioned there population growth and the like of that. Public transport as a whole, the numbers of users has gone up in the last few years. What are the main reasons for that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the economy is obviously important. If there aren't jobs there, if people don't have a reason to come to work, school, college or whatever, then obviously it's going to be hard to grow those numbers. So that's a critical factor. But I think the level of service that we deliver is also very important. So we're on a new hybrid bus today. One of the things we've found over the last 10 years in particular is it is very important to be constantly upgrading your product, to be constantly refreshing your fleet, to be constantly looking at the number of different gizmos, if you like, that you have on the bus, looking at new technology in terms of real-time passenger information, and even as we go up the quays here today, having bus priority measures, where the bus can actually gain a few seconds on the car and provide a sustainable public transport service that's fast, efficient and reliable. So all of those things are factors, and all of them have an importance in helping to grow those numbers.
So you rolled out the first of the hybrid buses in 2019.
Correct.
What has the reaction to them been and the success of them?
Yeah, what we have 9 hybrid buses in Cunningham Road bus depot, 3 different manufacturers, Wrights, Volvos and Alexanders. And it did take a while for the drivers to get used to the different type of mechanism that the hybrid buses deliver, and for the passengers to get used, even though the actual internal design of the bus is very similar to what it was before. What we're finding is what we hope to find, and that is that buses themselves are pretty robust, and once the drivers get used to the slightly different mechanisms, they've actually had no major problems. And they are much more energy efficient. So we're looking at somewhere in the order of 16% energy efficiency because of hybrid buses. What we wanted to do was we wanted to try a number of different hybrids because we think that's the next stage. After that, there are other modes being looked at in terms of hydrogen, in terms of electric, but we feel that it's important to test out hybrid properly. Trying 3 different bus manufacturers has given us a good feel for the slightly different mechanisms that each of those buses have, what works best, what doesn't work best. But so far we've been very happy with the run.
So do you envisage then that the entire fleet will become at some point hybrid, or indeed beyond that into fully electric?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and the answer, I suppose, the short answer is yes. Now, exactly what shape that fleet will take is still up in the air a little bit. As you may know, the National Transport Authority, who actually buy our buses on behalf of our customers, they have recently entered into an order for potentially up to 600 buses over the next 5 to 6 years. And the first 100 of those will hopefully be arriving in 2020, and they are the Alexander hybrid bus. They are much more energy efficient, as I mentioned earlier. There's a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions, and I definitely think that for the next 3 or 4 years, hybrid is probably the way we're going to go. But we are working in an interdepartmental group, and other experiments are going on hydrogen type buses. So until I think all of those experiments are fully teased out, we won't know for definite where we're going. But if the UK is to be used as an example, and London in particular, they now have, I think, close to 2,000 electric buses. So if I was to make a guess right now, I would say we are heading in that direction. But things could happen over the next 4 or 5 years that just change the picture a little bit. There are obviously a whole pile of challenges around that in the context of Our garages, for example, would all need infrastructure changes for plug-ins and so on and so forth. So for every decision you make, there's a whole pile of other challenges and decisions to be arrived at. But I think everyone is absolutely agreed, for sustainability, for the environment, for carbon footprint, we have to become much more energy efficient, and we have to go away from diesel.
And also, it improves the onboard experience for the passenger. We have the onboard portable charging points now, which is quite significant, and an innovation. What other innovations would you like to see for the consumer and for the passengers?
I think the area that is probably going to change most over the next 4 or 5 years is an area that's around the ticketing side of things, and account-based ticketing. I don't want to keep going back to London examples, but if you were to travel on the tube tomorrow, we'd all be familiar with what is like the Leap card, the Oyster card. But if you forgot your Oyster card tomorrow in London, you can use your credit card, or you can use your mobile phone. Ultimately, an account-based ticketing system like that, whereby it is much easier for people and much more transferable, so you can get on a bus, maybe go down the quays to a certain extent, link up with a Lewis or whatever the case may be, to make all of those moves in a seamless fashion. That's the way we want to go. So I think that is one of the features that we'd see. In terms of the comfort on the bus, in terms of the iPod plugins and so on and so forth, I'm not sure that there's an awful lot more that we can do in that area, because I think the standard is actually very, very high. Just to go back to a question you asked me earlier in terms of how long it would take to make the whole fleet, say, hybrid or whatever the case may be. We have, as I mentioned at the very start, nearly 1,000 buses. We would like to try and keep the average age of our fleet down to somewhere between 10 and 12 years. That would mean that we'd have to replace somewhere between 80 and 100 buses every year.
Okay.
And that's a significant cost, as you can imagine. And obviously we need assistance in that from the National Transport Authority. But that's the kind of order. We've been changing about 80 buses a year for the last 10 years. And if you don't do that, then you don't get to the quality that we've actually been able to maintain over that time frame.
Okay, that's good to know. I know Dublin Bus does a lot of work in the community. Can we talk about some of the CSR initiatives that you're involved in?
Absolutely. We are very, very conscious that in every single part of Dublin, communities are going through all kinds of different issues. So we like to give back because those people are actually coming on using our buses all of the time. So we do it in a number of different ways. So one of the ways is we have a schools community program where we have drivers going around to the schools talking to the children about how important it is in terms of etiquette on the bus and how they treat the bus and so on and so forth. And one of the knock-on benefits of that is those same children in more of the disadvantaged areas do a lot of community work in the summertime. So we help provide buses for trips to various places around Dublin that otherwise might not be accessible to them. So that's one area where corporate social responsibility. Second area would be, as has been well talked about over the years, we sometimes have been able to collect a little bit more money because people don't always take their change. And even though the amount of cash on a bus is reducing over the last few years because of the Leap card, we have utilised that money to give back to those local communities. So over the last 10 years or so, about 2,000 different local community groups, be they boxing clubs, be they volunteer groups, be they cancer research groups or whatever, we've managed to give prizes of €5,000, €2,000, €1,000 to those. It might be just providing a couple of buses, but it's kind of saying that we, as a major part of the Dublin community, believe that we should give back on some of these things. So it's something we've been very pleased to be involved in, and I think there's been a kind of a win-win all around. Obviously the people who benefit from the various awards obviously like that too, but it's a real mutual kind of helping each other scenario, you know. So.
And you're also currently, and I guess on an ongoing basis, looking to recruit bus drivers, and particularly female bus drivers. What are the attractions to being a bus driver?
Okay, there's a number of different aspects here. I was actually talking to a couple of the guys before the interview started, and we were talking about the fact that many's a driver pitched up to say, I'm going to work for the summer.
Right.
And 5 summers later, they've maybe met somebody, and 2 summers later they have 2 children, and 5 summers later or 10 summers later those children are growing up, and suddenly they're 25 years in the job. And it's a good sign, I think, of Dublin Bus as a place to work, that an awful lot of people stay there for quite a long time, and I'm one of those people myself. So there is that community, social aspect of actually being involved in a big family. So that's one aspect. I suppose people always aspire, drivers always aspire to get marked in on a route, and it does take a number of years to develop the seniority, if you like, that you can actually get marked in. But when you get marked in a route, it now becomes very familiar to you, because while you're doing different duties every day, you're coming across the same individuals, and you develop a rapport. And again, if you stay long enough, I was saying to some people this morning, you might actually be dealing with the sons and daughters of the parents from 20 years ago. So that has a nice kind of ring to it. And drivers can tell you many stories of the nice interactions that take place between customers and drivers. Having said all of that, it's not the easiest job in the world. You are working in one of the most congested cities in the world. I think the recent TomTom survey talked about it being the 17th most congested city. There's a lot of stop and start. On a wet day, the bus gets quite steamed up. You do work shift work, which means that you're working very early some mornings, and other nights you're working until after midnight. And now, of course, we have 24-hour services. So, but I think the overall benefits are that there's a real camaraderie there. There's a real social interaction. The number of times, and I think it's a great Dublin tradition of saying thank you to the driver as you get off the bus. All of those things, I think, are very much appreciated by the driving workforce, and they kind of get you up and motivated again for tomorrow. And then there are so many ways that you can actually assist people as you drive along. For example, if you see someone with maybe a guide dog at a bus stop, drivers are very good. They'll always stop. They'll always tell them what route they are. They'll always, in many cases, they'll know where the customer is going. They'll try and ensure that there's a seat there for them, and so on and so forth. So all of that interrelationship working and community and social involvement is a plus. If I can just go back to the female side of things, we have been conscious that, I think going back about 3 years ago, we were at about 7%. And that is low in the scheme of things. Now, unfortunately, we can't employ females unless they apply, and that was one of the issues. So a huge amount of effort has been done, and this would have been done in the past as well, but there's been huge effort done over the whole of 2019 to really encourage more females to join the workforce, and that's been very successful. So we have expressions of interest, believe it or not, of over 1,500 females. Now, many of those won't actually work out in the end. But I suppose because of the antisocial, sorry, not the antisocial, but the shift work that I spoke about earlier, it can be more difficult for females working very early in the morning or working very late at night, particularly in families environments and so on and so forth. So that would be probably one of the reasons why maybe not as many have applied. But certainly there is a big upsurge at the moment, and we would be aiming to try and at least double that 7% to 14% if we could, and we're well on the way towards that now.
Great. You touched on 24-hour transport.
Yes.
We do have it now from in Dublin and to the airport from the city centre. Can we expect more of that in more areas in the future?
I would certainly hope so. We actually have it on two routes, just to clarify. So we have it on the airport, as you quite rightly said, on the 41 route to Swords. And we also have it on one major cross-city route, the 15 route. And that operates from Clongriffin on the north side all the way across to Ballycullen on the south side, and it goes through that really important area of the city centre, South Great George's Street, right through Rathmines and Terranure, etc. So those two routes, I've actually been surprised, and perhaps I shouldn't be admitting this, with the figures that we've actually carried in December. And I had a quick look actually before I came out this morning just to have an up-to-date feeling on this. And our figures have actually continued to stay quite strong in the January period, because you expect January to be quieter, particularly at night time, than December. So I think people love the fact that that choice is now there, and it's not just there on a 24-hour service. And while most people would think about 24-hour as kind of nighttime economy, and we would ourselves see that as being very important, and Dublin is increasingly becoming a more nighttime economy type of city, like a typical European capital. But the other thing that kind of has surprised me a little bit over the years is the early hours at which people are actually getting up and going to work. Like several of our major routes now start at 5 o'clock in the morning. But these 24-hour services will show us that the half-hour journeys, the 4 o'clock journeys. And the other thing that's important as well is an awful lot of our services during the normal day, if you like, finish at, if you don't get the 11:30 bus, you know, you might be taxiing or walking, as the case may be. And I'm sure many of us have experienced that. The 12 o'clock and the 12:30 departures on those 24-hour services have been very busy. So I definitely think it's something the National Transport Authority have talked to us about. I definitely think that we need to be expanding our normal daytime services a little bit later at night, at least up to 12:30, and likewise for our early morning services. Yeah, 5 o'clock, you would be amazed at full buses coming in the road. Full buses, people not able to get on the bus. So that's a change, and that proves, I think, to some extent that the nighttime economy is actually flourishing, you know.
And the demand is truly
And
there.
the demand is there.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to additional routes, we have talked to National Transport Authority on a number of other routes, and we have done some work on them, but there is a cost. Like there's a cost on every additional service that you provide. So I do think we're going to monitor very, very carefully all of the lessons to be learned. And I think they have been mainly positive lessons from both the 41 and the 15. And we would hope probably the next most likely route is the 39A. But what we would love, and I think the NCA would aspire to this as well, is that we would have a network of routes, a little bit like the Nightlink service that operates on Friday night and Saturday night, whereby on any major corridor, ultimately, there would be a 24-hour service operating. And that gives people choice. So that's something we'd like to do.
Okay, a couple of questions as we near the end now. So we get to do a bit of blue skies thinking,
Okay.
and also a bit of wish granting as well. So if we look 5 years down the line from now, what changes do you hope will have changed within Dublin Bus and the public transport sector in Dublin?
Okay, it's a very interesting question, and I'm going to revert back to a thing that confuses some people a little bit, a thing called Bus Connects. And Bus Connects is a project, if you like, that the National Transport Authority rolled out about 2 years ago. And many people think that when Bus Connects is mentioned, it's only about a redesign of the bus network. It is about that, but it's also about a whole lot of other aspects of that public transport network. So for example, the type of bus, and we've talked about hybrids already, that would be a feature of it. We talked about account-based ticketing, that would be a feature of it. We talked about real-time passenger information, that would be a feature of it. And I think possibly the most important feature is what they call their core corridor strategy. And what that means is, I mentioned at the very start of this interview the importance of bus lanes to Dublin Bus and to our customers. But what you'll find on an old city road network is that there are many places where there isn't as much space to provide that type of priority. And the National Transport Authority came out with a very bold proposal about 2 years ago, and they've been working very hard on it since, that they would try on every radial corridor excuse me, to effectively create a bus lane almost from the start of the trip all the way into town. Now, it won't be possible to do it everywhere, and in some instances there may have to be a change in the local bus network. But if something radical like that doesn't happen soon, that 17th highest congested city, unfortunately statistic, is going to go in the wrong direction.
Is it?
Will be the 16th, the 15th, the 14th. And buses are just going to take longer and longer to get from A to B. If I can give you an example of that, go back to the 15 route that I mentioned on the 24-hour service. To get from Clongriffin in Clare Hall off the Malahide Road to Ballycullen in Temple Oak will take you in a normal typical journey, most times of the day, 2 hours from one direction. That's a long journey. That's an average speed of probably somewhere around 10, 12 kph. And it's variable. It could take you an hour and 50 minutes or an hour and 40 minutes, or it could take you 2 hours and 10 minutes. And that variability increases unreliability and makes punctuality harder to achieve. And I think if we want to continue to have public transport out there as one of the major modes and choices for people, and we do want to encourage more people to use public transport, then over the next 5 years, the rollout of that core corridor project and it won't have its, or it will have its challenges, is something that we believe is hugely important. And we would give huge credit to the National Transport Authority for actually putting forward the funding, and hopefully that funding will continue to come through. But they've talked about upwards of 1.5 to 2 billion for that Greater Dublin project. And we think that's an essential.
Okay.
So that's something we'd see as being very important.
Okay, and do you think it will happen?
I think it will happen. I think sometimes if you ask for 100%, you mightn't get it. But I think it's critically important to get a really large part of it, because this is a beautiful city. It has so many exciting features. But one thing that's not going to happen, particularly within the canals, there's not going to be new roads. The roads can't widen any further. So we have to utilise that road space as efficiently as we can. And anyone that has the privilege of sitting on a bus and seeing the positive impact of a bus lane, particularly with a full bus versus maybe 35 cars lined up with one person in each of them, can see the huge benefits the bus lanes can give. So I think it will happen, not in its entirety, but I think it has to happen very close to its entirety for it to be effective.
Okay. Now, if you had a magic wand and we could just wave it over all the aspects, the challenges, the obstacles that face public transport and Dublin Bus, and in an instant, the magic wand would change one of those things, what would it be?
I suppose going back to something that we've talked about there, and in the new contract we have with the National Transport Authority, we've been lucky that we're onto our third contract. Maybe not lucky, maybe the fact that we've delivered the first two has given them the confidence to give us a third contract. And one of the things that they're measuring us against, and quite rightly I think, they're measuring us against punctuality, they're measuring us on high frequency services against gap between buses, and they're measuring things like, you know, if we say we're going to operate 100 kilometres in a day, do we operate 100 kilometres? All very reasonable things. If I had a magic wand tomorrow, it would be that we operate 100 kilometres when we say we're going to operate 100 kilometres, and that we do it in a very reliable, punctual way. And that if we talk about a 10-minute service on a high-frequency bus route, no matter where you come out on that route, there is a 10-minute service. It's very hard to achieve that when I talk about a journey taking 2 hours to get from one end to the other, and to ensure that every single bus on that route, you know, is evenly spaced with the bus in front of it and the bus behind it. But we're working very, very hard to try and achieve the targets being set for us by the National Transport Authority. And we have drivers obviously have a huge part to play in that, controllers and supervisors have a huge part to play in that, and the whole management team at Dublin Bus have a huge part to play in that, because we have to make sure that the processes are in place, the technology is in place, the tools that people need to ensure that they can do their job properly are in place. But my wish would be that we every single day achieve what it is we say on the tin, and that's what we try to do.
That's all you can do. You can do no more than that. Donal, thank you so much for joining us on Going Places. It's been really interesting. Appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you very much.